Now, I know you've been told things about what it is to be a reflector, and you've been told about reflector strategy, but I want to take you into something much deeper. First of all, I want you to understand something very simple. All other types, whether they have open centers that are white or not, they're not like you. They're not like you. They have no idea whatsoever who you are. And the way in which they operate, those things that you can hear in human design about the way people deal with open centers and all of that, has nothing to do with you. Has nothing to do with you. Because you're different. And you're different because all of it is open from the beginning. And it means when you're looking at somebody's design and you see a center defined and they have undefined centers, that undefined center is a counterpoint. And in fact, it's a conditioning counterpoint and is very vulnerable. But the fact that you're born with all of that open, with all of it open, it doesn't operate the same thing, the same way. It doesn't mean that all of you are more vulnerable than anybody else. It's not true. As a matter of fact, there's nothing that has a greater capacity to survive anything than a reflector. In other words, there is an inherent strength built into all of this openness. And it's very important for you not to measure yourself against the three other types. They're very different. You really are the alien, pardon me, but it's true. You really are the alien in the mix. And the difficulty is that from the moment that you came into the world, you were conditioned to be like everybody else. And you're not like everybody else. And because of that, you've taken layers and layers and layers of conditioning and have made that your life. And it's not what your life is, and it's not who you are. What I hope I can do for you, because I've rarely had a chance, after all, I'd have to have a room of 400 people just to get to 4 reflectors. Here's a real opportunity for me to tell you things that I never have the time to tell reflectors. Everything, obviously, in your design is open, but I want to start here. I want to start with the sacral center. Now think about what happens to you when you come into the world. I'm talking about the adult. I'm talking about the child and how it starts right at the beginning. The moment that you come into the world, the expectation of the majority is that you are here to be an energy type. That is the expectation. When you come out of the womb, it's not your mother saying, here is a child that doesn't have any consistent or fixed energy. As a matter of fact, it doesn't, because of course all of those white centers, whenever you take energy in, you amplify it. You boost it up. And the moment that you're a child in that environment and you're going to come into almost all, not all, there are exceptions, but most reflectors will come into an environment in which they're energized. What that means is that not only do they take that on as their conditioning, after all, they have no way of understanding what's happening to them, they assume that they're the energy. And all of the conditioning that they get from their parents is conditioning to make them an energy type, and specifically a manifester. Do this, do that, be good, don't do that, whatever the case may be. All of that has nothing to do with who you are. Has nothing to do with it. But it is the beginning of the controlling mechanism. And the controlling mechanism in your life starts with that open sacral center. And it's something to understand. The sacral center is about work. It's about work. That's why generators are the great workers on the planet. They're the ones that have the consistent energy flow. They're the ones that are here to be doing all the work all the time. You came into the world, and you came into the world not to work. You came into the world not to work. Now, I don't mean that you don't do things in your life. I'll explain that. But you're not here to labor. You're not here to be an energy being. You're not here to have that kind of work. And remember that you can always be a super slave. A super slave. Generators are slaves. You, with an open sacral center, you can become the super slave. And of course, being a super slave is deeply exhausting. It's deeply exhausting. You're not built for that. But that's the way you were conditioned from the beginning. And the way you were conditioned is to be controlled. To be controlled. Now, it's one of the first things for you to recognize about the nature of who you are, is that nobody has a right to tell you what to do. And nobody has a right to control you. Nobody. And particularly when it comes to what you do. What you do is constantly being controlled by others. But what you do is something that specifically has to be your decision, and I'll talk about that decision-making process in a while. But I want you to begin to understand that from the moment that you came into the world, you were being conditioned not to be the alien, not to be the unusual, not to be the special, because you are. You were conditioned to be like everybody else. And not only do you end up like everybody else, but you end up as an exaggerated expression of it. And in the end, of course, you feel totally controlled by everybody and everything around you, and you don't seem to have any true identity or true direction of your own. When I was given all this information, I spent most of my time dealing with energy types, because they're the ones that, without much education, without much information, by simply being given their strategy, they could be transformed. But the moment that you come to a non-energy type, and particularly in dealing with what you are as reflectors, it's so important for you to see that there is no instant gratification to this knowledge. There are steps that have to be taken first. Part of it is that you really have to understand how these things work. If you don't have an intellectual involvement in understanding how it all works, you're not going to find your place, and you're not going to find the way in which you can really operate correctly in the world. Mystically, and I don't mean to dwell on that too much, but mystically there was a great transformation that took place about 220 years ago. That transformation changed the hierarchy, or changed the way in which the hierarchy operates in terms of type, and there's no end to hierarchies. For so long, the world was ruled by beings like me, that is, manifestors, people who are the only type, 9% of humanity, that have the capacity to be able to act on their own. And all of that has changed in the last 220 years. Reflectors truly have a role in this life, and they have a role in the future. That role is about them being the only ones that can actually judge what is really going on, positively or negatively, in the environment. Whether that's the human environment or the civilization environment or whatever the case may be. There's a very, very special role that's there for reflectors. However, being that reflectors are so deeply conditioned, getting to that place is difficult. You all know that you've been told that strategy for you is not only about waiting for things to come to you, but in order for you to be able to come to a reliable decision, you have to go through a time sequence. It's time to the lunar sequence. You have to go through basically a month before you can get to a place where you can really process things and be clear. Now, of course, that means that strategy is deeply limited, after all. You can't use that strategy on a moment-by-moment basis, nor is it viable on a moment-by-moment basis. That strategy is only about very, very significant things in your life, which begin with where, and I'll get to that after. What I'm trying to get to is that you're going to spend your life conditioned by the vast majority. And so what really matters for you is that whatever you enter into correctly via your strategy, but you also have to realize that from the moment you enter into it, from then onward, you're dependent on the way you're going to operate through the auras of those beings that you're connected to. That means you really have to understand how things work. If you don't understand how things work, you really get lost. The key begins with recognizing what that sacral in you, that open sacral, says. It says, you can't tell me what to do, you have to ask me. You can't demand that I do things, you have to ask me. And one of the first processes in really waking up to be what it is, to be a reflector, it begins with this demand for that respect. It's very important. You see, once you enter into a relationship or a work or a place correctly, you no longer are reliant on that lunar strategy. That lunar strategy is for important decisions in your life. But on the day-to-day basis, it's where you are and with whom you're in contact. And when you're in that field of energy, then everything has to be requested of you so that you can respond. So that you can be the one that's in control of defining what you do or what you don't do. There are little things that I can tell you that as techniques are things that can really help. And one of the first ones has to do with the way in which generators operate. The way in which generators operate is that they're designed to go to sleep when they're exhausted. Now, you have an undefined sacral center, and you have to understand that there's this enormous pressure on you to not only go to sleep when you're exhausted, but even to go to sleep later and even more exhausted, and that's not what it's about. And one of the first things that you can do to adjust your basic biorhythm is to go to bed, not to sleep, to go to bed before you're tired. This is very important. It isn't about you have to force yourself to go to sleep. It's about getting into bed. It's about getting into a prone position, whether you read or you watch something or listen to something or whatever the case may be. But it's very important for you, for your well-being. You'll see after a couple of weeks of that, you'll begin to realize how much more physically comfortable you feel when you get up the next day. In other words, this is very, very important for you not to get caught up in that. And of course, what often happens for reflectors, most reflectors end up with energy types in their lives. Most reflectors end up with lovers that are energy types. And you know, if you're a reflector and you're with a generator, that generator is saying, what are you going to bed for? You know, there's a movie coming on, and let's do this, and let's do that, and it's still early, and blah, 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 blah. And it goes on and on and on and on and on, and it's incredibly unhealthy if you're a reflector. Very important. Get into bed before you're tired. You know, even if that's hours before you actually fall asleep, that's okay. But get into bed before you're tired. You'll see it makes a big difference in the way in which you operate. The second thing about that is, as long as I've been doing readings, teaching people human design, I've told them the same thing over and over again. It's very important to sleep in your own bed, in your own room. This is one of the essentials of the integrity of the aura. And those of you who are reflectors, you have to recognize that more than anybody else, how important it is for you to protect your aura when you're unconscious. Having your own space is not about problems in love, sex, any of those things. It's a basic respect for the integrity of somebody's aura. Now, often the greatest difficulty is simply being able to have the space. You know, I have two children that live with me, and recently my wife and I were looking for a house, and it's easy to find a 3-bedroom house, but it's really hard to find a 4-bedroom house. You know, to be able to get that extra room, because, you know, the conditioning is now you sleep together, the conditioning is you're in each other's aura. So this combination of being able to go into your own space, it's like taking a shower. It's really cleansing. You go into your own space, you go in before you're exhausted, you lie down, you relax, and you'll see you wake up in the morning, you feel fresh and you feel clean. At the core of all reflectors is an open G center. And the G center is the place of our identity, and that identity is framed on two things. It's framed on direction, it's framed on love. All reflectors come into the world not knowing who they are. It's only natural, and they're never going to find out, so don't worry about it. This is not the role of reflectors. Every other type, I tell them, you have to know who you are, and this is how you find out who you are. Well, you're not here to find out who you are. You're here to be totally sensitive to who is around you. This is something completely different. You have a very, very different role in this life. Think about what it's like. You walk out of here and you walk down, I think there's some shops down there, whatever the case may be, and you go walking down that street. And while you're walking down that street, you suddenly notice that you don't particularly feel good. It's not you. It's all the people on that street. You know, when I do a general introduction to what a reflector is, I talk about the canary, the small bird that was used by miners that they would take down into the mine shafts because the canaries were sensitive to poisonous gases. Actually, they would die first. And the fact that the canary was so sensitive that they would succumb to the gases early enough would give the people enough time to get out of the mines. But that analogy isn't about the morbidity of that image. It's just really to point out the power that is there within a reflector and how confusing life can be. Because you see, how you feel at any given moment is about where you are and who's there. Your barometers, You're barometers for the communities that you're a part of. You're barometers. You're here to be able to walk into a room, and by how you feel, that's the composite of that room. But you spend your lives always thinking it's you. Now look, that Open G Center, there's something very special for you to understand. It's the key, in a sense, to what life can be for you. And that key is that if you're in the wrong place, you're with the wrong people. If you're in the wrong place, you're with the wrong people. Place means everything to you. Everything. Everything. And you have to be in the right place in your life. And the moment that you're not in the right place is the moment that you don't have the right people around you. And because you're reflectors, you become that. You become that. Not the individual of that, not one person influencing you. They all influence you. All of them. So if you're not in the right place, then you're not going to be surrounded by energy that is compatible for you, energy that is comfortable for you, and that's going to make life difficult for you. The right place means everything. Everything. The most difficult thing for a reflector child is that the moment they come into the world, they're almost invariably in the wrong place. And they don't get a chance to choose. Some of them are powerful enough that their parents end up moving anyway. But the reality is, for reflectors, place is everything. And how do you get there? You get there by waiting for place to be offered to you. Only then can you know. You know, let's say that you want to find a new house, a new place to live, a new flat, whatever the case may be. It's not for you to go out looking. That isn't going to work. You know, whether it's friends who will call you up and tell you that there's a place available, or whether you hire somebody, an agent, whatever, to find a place for you, let them show you different places. As a reflector, you have a cycle you have to go through before you can make that kind of decision. But the most important decision you're going to make in your life is not about who you love. It's not about what you do. The most important decision you make in your life is where you are. Because that's the key to everything. That's the key to the way in which your whole process can be built, but it begins with place. And if everything else about you is correct and you're not in the right place, that distorts everything. It starts with place, and this is one of the most important things for you to recognize. You know, you really have to get to a point where, you know, you watch and wait for the possibility for you to know whether you're in the right place now. You know, because of course in moments like this where I'm teaching you and I'm telling you about these things, you're already in a place. You're already, you know, involved with people. You're already in a community. You're already in all of those things, and all of the conditioning is there inside of you. And this is about a rebuilding process. And the way it gets rebuilt is that by insisting that you're asked, eventually you'll be asked the questions you need to be asked. You know, are you happy in this house? You know, and then you can start processing. Are you, you know, do you enjoy being here? You know, whatever the case may be, you've got to get to a point where you are clear within yourself that you're in the right place, because that's where everything begins for you in a healthy way. If you go for what the tourists would do in Wien, you know, you go for a walking tour through the neighborhoods. As reflectors, you can actually define the difference between all of those neighborhoods by how you feel as you walk through them. This is the magic of what it is to be a reflector. This capacity to be able to filter a larger aura, to be able to filter a larger environment. And the success of what you are as a being is so dependent on the environment that you're a part of. As a reflector, if you're surrounded by thieves and junkies, you can't help but be a thief and junkie. There really isn't anything you can do, because you're always going to be subject to the conditions of the environment around you, because that's what you filter. That's what you take in. And it's one of the things to recognize about the right place, You know, the right place is when you walk out, not just the home, the house, the flat, whatever, but when you walk out into that street, it feels better than it does in other places. And you know that because you feel that inside of you. The throat center. The throat center is the center of metamorphosis. It is the heart of both our capacity to be able to articulate in language, and it's about our potential to be able to act and to be able to do. You're non-metamorphic. In other words, you don't metamorphose consistently. There isn't anything that you can do consistently. As a matter of fact, to do anything consistently is dangerous for you. Think about it. You're not energy types. You know, it's very easy for you to overdo everything. And you really have to see that you're intended to operate differently than others, and you're certainly not intended to compete with energy types. The open throat means that your whole physical development has been unpredictable. You know, whether you're going to reach sexual maturity early or late, you know, the way in which your body metabolizes foods, the way in which your thyroid system operates, all of that, it's not abnormal, it's simply subject to operating inconsistently. You're not here to be doers. You're not here to be like the rest. You're not here to be super generators, you know, laboring away all the time. That's not what you're here for. Yes, you're here to do something. You're here to sample all of that. You know, you're here to guide in that sense. You're here to make other people aware, because you're the ones that are here to pick up all of that energy. But what's so important for you to recognize is this is not a life in which you initiate. It's not. Let everybody else do the initiating. For years, people would say to me, if you could have any kind of design, what would you have? And I said to them, I'd like to have a design that's totally open like a reflector, but there's no gates either. You know? It's totally open. And when it's totally open, the capacity is extraordinary. That is, you get to take in the program. You get to take in everything purely. It's perfect. The open centers, oh, they're hell. Oh, yeah. All the conditioning. I'll show you some of the worst conditioning you get. But you see, the moment you get past an open center just being conditioning, it becomes what it's intended to be, a pathway to wisdom. Nobody on this planet is born with a greater potential to be wise than you. Nobody. You're here to be wise, and you're here to be wise about the nature of the world around you. That's why there's one reflector for every 100 people. You know, they're here to be able to be wise in the way of what is going on around them and to be of service to those other 99 by letting them know what's going on, because that's the gift. And that's the gift that you have. But the moment you get caught up in the game, the moment you get conditioned by the energy types, the moment that you're trying to be a super energy type to prove that you can, you know, do all those things and be all those things, it's all lost. And you're not going to be able to fulfill not only your role, but you're not going to be healthy. You're not going to be healthy. You can't overload all these centers and escape illness, breakdown, sickness, all kinds of stuff. Because after all, if you walk down the street, you'll feel right away that there's a lot of craziness out there. There's a lot of illness out there. There's a lot of pain out there. There's a lot of suffering out there. And you filter it all. If you think that stuff is you, you're going to amplify it and you're going to become a victim of it. And it's very difficult to get out of that. All reflectors have open egos. The heart center. The heart center is the center of willpower. And that means that all reflectors have inconsistent willpower. And of course, the fact is that they end up getting placed under enormous pressure to display consistent will. They think that there's something wrong with them, that they can't stay with something in that sense, or they don't have the will to take something through to the finish. You're here to operate inconsistently. And you're not here to be willful. And the most dangerous thing that you can do in your life is to make a promise. I mean, there's nothing more dangerous for you in this life than to make a promise. Because to fulfill that promise and the will necessary and the energy necessary, none of which is natural for you. And if you start off in this life making promises, you're going to end up being very, very unhappy about yourself. People who have an open ego center have a poor sense of self-worth. They don't consider themselves to be of value. And it's a great dilemma not considering yourself to be of value. The most important thing for the undefined ego, for you in terms of the undefined ego, is not to get trapped into being willful, not to get trapped in saying, volunteering, I will do that and I will get it done by tomorrow. You know, that's hell for a reflector. And please don't tell that to your children because they'll never forgive you. Because the reality is that you're not here to keep promises. You can't keep promises, so don't get into the promising business. Let others make the promises. That's the whole point. Let others make the promises. It's not for you to do that. This brings us to the awareness centers. We have 3. Splenic center here, the ajna center along with the head, the mental system, and over here, the emotional system. I'm going to start over here in the splenic system. The spleen is the body's immune system. It's the feel-good center. So you came into this life not feeling good. You're designed not to not feel good. You're designed to be deeply sensitive to either feel good or the lack of it. And so the moment you come into the world, because human beings don't operate correctly, because you live in a world of the not self, the world is a place that doesn't make you feel good. It doesn't. You know, everybody that has an open spleen, their whole life is this, well, I don't feel good. You know, I don't feel quite right, whatever the case may be. And everybody that has an open spleen, what they're looking for in this life is the feel good. The feel good. Anybody that has a defined spleen can be somebody that can make you feel good. Remember that the open center amplifies. It also says something about your biology. That is, that you have an immune system that needs to be educated. You have to learn how to look after yourself health-wise. You can't expect your immune system to do it all for you. And that means that you have to care for yourself in terms of the diet that you have, the lifestyle that you have, in order to be able to build up the strength of your immune system. But the most important thing is what happens here. What happens in this open system is a strategy, a not-self strategy that develops from the time that you're a child. Think about what that's like. You're a child, you've got an open splenic system, you don't particularly feel good. And mama or papa has a defined spleen, or both. And the moment that they take you in their arms and they not only hook up your spleen, but amplify it, they really make you feel good. Having somebody make you feel good isn't necessarily good for you. That's the first thing. So many of these children with open spleens who have parents that have defined spleens end up holding on to parents that may be cruel to them, that may punish them. You know, it's like the wife with the open spleen, with the husband with the defined spleen, and every night he beats her. And her friend says to her, "Why don't you leave him?" She can't. She can't, because that feel-good is more powerful than if it's actually good for me or not. It gets rid of this sense of simply not feeling good. Think about your strategy as a not-self. By having an open spleen, what that means is that you hold on to a lot of people and a lot of things that are not good for you. You hold on to people in your life that hook you up and amplify that, and they're not necessarily good for you. And you end up being possessive and holding on to people much longer than you should. Most people can never let go. Again, this goes back to you being correct. You have to see that the only way that you're going to be healthy as beings is that you have to operate correctly. It means you have to enter into things correctly, and that truly begins with the right place. But you also have to see the pressures that have been placed on you, through conditioning. in all the openness, you have to see that you're not here to originate. This is the first step in recognizing truly who you are. That's not a limitation. It really isn't. Somebody has to be able to assess what's going on. This is what being a reflector is all about. Take the example of the mind, the Ajna Center, our center of conceptualizing. You come into the world with an open mind. It means that you come in basically with an intellectual potential. It's open, after all. It can take in the logic, it can take in the abstract, it can deal with the unique. In other words, it's a mind that's open and it can deal with all kinds of concepts in all kinds of ways. It's not fixed. And it means that no thought that you can have is ever going to stay fixed, because it can't. Now, there are people who come into the world and their mind is fixed. It's fixed in a certain way. That's also a limitation. It's only fixed in that very specific way. But they can consistently work with, over and over and over again, the same concept without doubt, without confusion. Now, when the child comes into the world with an open mental system, particularly when they come into a home where parents have a defined mind, then what happens to these children is that they're conditioned to think like their parents. They're conditioned to think like those people who have a fixed mind. And they begin to think that that's their mind. It's not. You see, the ideal of an open mind is that you're actually the ones that are here to be able to tell the difference between good concepts and bad concepts. You're not the ones that are here to initiate the concepts. You're the ones who are here that filter them. You know, this is the intellectuality of your design, to be able to take concepts in and to be able to filter them and say, all right, this is a good one, this isn't. This is what you should be doing, in a sense, with all of your centers. You take in conditioning all the time. This conditioning is okay, this conditioning isn't. This conditioning is okay, this conditioning isn't. See, not only are you different in the sense that you have no definition in your design, but just about all the other types, and with one minor exception amongst the minority of projectors, all other types have a place of inner authority. That is a place inside of themselves where they can make a reliable decision. You came into the world without that. There is no place in that design to make a reliable decision. There isn't. You see, it's not about you. Your design isn't about you. Your design is about filtering a larger field. It's the larger field that actually has to make the decisions, and then you, in your capacity, can say, that was a good decision. No, that one wasn't a good decision. But making a decision yourself, that is very difficult. Now remember, your primary strategy, that is the strategy that involves waiting the cycle of the moon, that primary strategy is about very, very specific things in your life. And you have to see that in that cycle of going through the timing mechanism, and I'll look at that in more detail later, in that cycle of going through the timing mechanism, there is a technique for you that's essential. And that technique for you is that no matter what thing you're working on as a potential decision, you have to share it with other people in order to hear it come back. So, you know, you get an offer for a job, friendship, romance, whatever the case may be, something that is really significant where your primary strategy is involved, and you're going to go through your lunar cycle to be clear. While you're going through that cycle, what's essential is you keep on talking about that decision with other people. Now remember, it's not about other people having control over you. Remember, you're not here to be controlled. It's not about you asking them for advice. In fact, don't tell them, but you're using them. I mean, you're just using them as a backboard so that you can hear what comes out of you at different times during that lunar cycle. At the end of it, you'll really know what your decision is, and it'll be based on the accumulation of how different you talk about it each time. You know, one time you're talking to somebody and saying, I've got this possibility for this job, you know, and you can hear it in yourself that you're excited and whatever. But you know, a week later, after all, it's a lunar cycle, a week later, you may be talking about the same thing with somebody, and what's coming out is the negatives. Because you see, you weren't designed to be able to do that easily, because you're designed to actually filter the decisions of the totality. That is, filter the decisions of the community you belong in. So at the personal level, decision-making for you can be difficult. It does require the time. It does require you to be courageous enough not to have to feel pressured in jumping to a decision. So you can go through this process of discussing it so you can really get to a point where you're clear. Imagine that kind of situation where you have some kind of a gathering, like a parent-teachers gathering at a school, and everybody is being gathered and being directed to make a vote on something, to vote yes or no on something. It's not your job to decide whether you should vote yes or no, because the moment that you get caught up in that, you lose your identity. It's for you to have a feeling which way the vote's going to go and to be able to assess whether the vote went well or not afterwards. But it's not about you becoming them. Nothing's more difficult in a reflector's life than having an open solar plex system. Nothing is more difficult. After all, we live in a world in which the majority, just over 50% of humanity are emotional. The solar plex system is deeply powerful, and it literally colors the world we live in. That is, the emotional system operates in a wave, and it brings us a wave of hope and pain. And that wave is something that is, it can be overwhelming to somebody who has an open solar plex system. Because what happens with all open centers is that open centers amplify. So if you have an open solar plex system and somebody is angry with you and they're putting that anger into you, you amplify that anger, you become even angrier. If somebody is very happy with you and very pleased with you, they can bliss you out because you will amplify that emotional system. And you're always being taken up and down on an emotional person's wave. I was married to several emotional women. And, there are mornings that I would get up in the morning and I would be in a terrible mood, and all I wanted to do was just annihilate them. They'd wake up in a bad mood, I'd be in a horrible mood. And on the rare mornings that they would wake up in a good mood and I'd be in twice as good a mood, they'd ask me what's going on and really annoy me anyway. The emotional system is everywhere, and you really have to see that people who come into the world like you, they come into the world with a basic potential for deep instability. And that deep instability is about being taken up and down on the emotional wave and feeling out of control. And feeling out of control because it's not your emotional system. At the bottom of the chart is the root center. And everybody who has an open root center is under pressure in this life. And that pressure leads to projectors or anybody else who has that center open, trying to handle the pressure and get things done and hurry through so they can get rid of the pressure. There's all these things that are there, all of them, and all of those combinations and all of the possibilities of conditioning. That's what you're here to take in. You're not here to be emotional beings. You're not here to feel good all the time. Otherwise, you lose your alertness and stop really being of value. You're not here to be workers. You're not. You're here to be critics. You're here to be guides. You're here to be judges. You're here to be censors. You're here to be those that can truly sense what's going on around you. But first, you have to be healthy. And being healthy for you begins with entering into the right place correctly. Once you have the right place as a base, you can build from that. But you really have to see how important it is for you to understand. Don't be like everybody else. And don't be concerned about being like everybody else. This is new knowledge. It's still not at a time where the nature of what it is to be a reflector is common knowledge and people take advantage of the gifts of the reflector. So you end up being caught up in the mainstream, you end up being caught up in the generator-dominated world, and you don't get to really live a life that not only is fulfilling, but where the real gifts that you have come out. I'm enjoying myself because next April, I will be holding an international event. I'm in the process of hiring reflectors. And I'm hiring reflectors not to work. They're not being hired to work. They're being hired simply to be there. Because they're the ones who know when anything isn't right. They're the ones who know immediately if there's a problem. They're the ones who know if somebody's unhappy. They're the ones who pick up the whole vibe. They pick it all up. They're my look after the people employees. In other words, they're there to fulfill their natural role. They don't have to work like the others. That's not the point. That's not what they're here for. I can't depend on them to be consistent energy-wise. What I can count on is that they're going to be sensitive to the environment around them because that's their gift. And by the way, these reflectors are deeply involved in human design. And that is their gift. They can always tell what's going on in the environment around them. And they're perfect for being able to maintain harmony in that environment because nothing gets to be, or nothing is allowed to last too long that isn't right or isn't healthy because it's your gift to be able to sense it. At some point, somewhere, there's going to be a time in which the basic gifts of reflectors are honored. That time isn't now, which means you have to make it happen for yourselves. In other words, you simply can't afford to allow the majority to lock you into their game because that's not what you're here for. You really are here to be able to be the most essential ingredient in any group. Because in microcosm, you will always represent that group because you take them all in. You're taking it all in. You have incredible gifts to take it all in, but don't get caught in it. Don't fall for it. Measure it. See it. Classify it. This is what you're here for. This is your gift. To be a reflector and to take advantage of this knowledge, you really do have to understand how all this stuff works. Your real role in all of this is that by understanding yourself and the way in which that works, you also get to understand the others. And again, this is what enhances your gifts. When you're looking at a reflector's chart, the first thing to recognize about a reflector's chart is that every single one of these gates that you have, all of them are pointed towards something that you have to deal with in life. All of them. In other words, each and every one of these gates that you have, wherever they happen to be, whether they're black conscious or whether they're red unconscious, they're always pointing at something that you're going to meet in this life, that you're going to have to deal with in this life, and what can condition you in this life. But it also tells you something else. The sum total of who you are is all the potential that's there in you to discover all of the other ends of these potentials that you have in your design. And in order to really grasp what that is, you have to understand what they mean. So for example, if we take here this seventh gate, this seventh gate in the G center, this is a gate of the role of the self, the logical role of the self in any role of leadership. So here's somebody that built into them is this aspect. But it's not about them becoming a leader necessarily. It isn't about them doing something. It's about them discovering the other end. And the other end, the 31st gate, is a gate of influence. In other words, to understand how the role of a leader can influence others. It's not about necessarily being that, but it's one of the things that this person has to understand. They have to understand how people are influenced because that's a theme for them. Not only is it a theme, each and every one of these gates that you have in your design that's pointed towards, something that's open at the other end. Not only is that a theme for you, but it's also a theme that you live out every lunar month. And this is the whole basis of you being lunar in that sense, as opposed to the other types being solar. In other words, there's a mechanism for you. The moon moves faster than any other object in the way in which we're programmed. It takes the moon approximately 28 and a half days to go through its cycle. And that means that as the moon goes through its cycle, every single one of those gates that you're pointed at, that you don't have, you get to feel and experience for around 12 hours. For around 12 hours. When you go through that period where a human design analyst says to you, your decision making, you got to go the lunar, the whole business that they tell you, what's so important to understand in that is that what you're getting to go through in that lunar cycle is that you're getting to go through all those aspects that you're here to master, that you're here to be wise about, not that you're here to be conditioned by negatively. Everything about this wheel is that it's a way in which we can see how programming takes place. And obviously the moon is going to go through this entire programming field of 64 gates, and it's going to go through that every lunar cycle. So that means that around 14 times a year, the nature of who you really are gets revealed. Everybody has a different frequency. Types have a different frequency. Awareness has different frequencies. I've tried on a number of occasions to describe how to see a reflector. And one of the ways that I've described it is that if you could follow a reflector with a camera for 28 and a half days, if you could follow a reflector, through its lunar cycle, and then you can compress all of that 28 and a half days down into, let's say, a day, you would really see who the reflector is. But we don't look at things that way. Because reflectors aren't here to find their own identity. Again, you're so different than all the other types. You're not here to find your own identity. You'll get lost in this life if you're trying to find your own identity. You're really here to sense the identity of something larger than yourself. In essence, that can also be deeply mystical. It's not just the community around you. That can extend to the totality. That can extend to, your spiritual life, whatever it may be. You're designed to be integrated into the whole. You're designed to see something larger than yourself. You're designed to have a sensory capacity for something that is much larger than yourself. Yet each and every one of you are not the same. Yes, you may all be open, but you have different activations within that openness. And those different activations as a pattern through those 28 and a half days, those activations show you the way in which you operate. One of the most important things that you can do in your education, your own education about the nature of yourself, is that what you have to do is that you have to map this wheel. And you have to map this wheel for yourself. And it's a very simple thing to do. You simply take a diagram like this. If you don't have one, it's easy to get a hold of one from Ilse. You get a diagram of simply an open wheel. And then you look at your design. And you don't look at the gates that you have. Don't look at those. Look at the gate that's missing in that sense at the other end. And then go to this wheel and mark it in. Now what you'll begin to see is that there is a sequence. It's like in what it is to be you, if I could see it all compressed, in what it is to be you, the way awareness works through you is that it works through a set sequence. That is, there's certain times that you're mental, there's certain times you're splenic, there's certain times you're identity, there's certain times you're ego, there's certain times you're emotional, there's certain times you're this, there's certain times you're that. And it works in a sequence, and it works in a sequence regularly all your life. The world forever was lunar. I mean, it was. It wasn't until the whole Middle Eastern sun god trip that it changed. And then everything began to be solar-based. But the reality is it's a lunar world. And you're really in the pure lunar timing. But you have to see that the fact that you're in this lunar timing is also showing you who you are. That is showing you your unique gifts of being able to integrate with the whole. And it also shows you your pattern in that decision-making process. While you're bouncing things off of somebody, it's going to be very different when, for example, you might have mental activation from the moon. It'll be very different when it's emotional activation. It'll be different if it's ego activation. In other words, the way you process any piece of information is going to be different depending where you are in your lunar cycle. As I keep telling you, without the knowledge, without getting into the information, There really is no way. There's no easy way for you. Human Design Austria produces an ephemeris. That is, it produces a human design ephemeris, and in that ephemeris, the position of the moon is charted according to time, so you can see where that moon is all the time. And you can begin with your own map to see how your programming works. If you look at your month, if you look at your lunar cycle, you're going to see that the way you feel about yourself, the way you feel about others, the way you think, the way you operate, that all of that works in a repeating sequence. And you have to first see what that sequence is to begin to relax about who you are. Because only when you go through a sequence like that do you get to a point of being clear, do you get to a point of being able to make decisions. In other words, those sequences are really your life, and when you begin to chart them and you understand what it means, not just saying, aha. It's about understanding what it means, and you begin to see what your gift is and what you're intended to connect to and what you're intended to filter and to be aware of. I began with the technique related to sleep and how important it is for you to sleep properly. That is, how important it is for you to get into bed before you're exhausted, before you're tired. This is something essential. The other side of that is eating. And eating is something that is very important. First of all, when you come into the world and you have a design like that in which you're entirely open, you have a vulnerable stomach. So the nature of your diet and your ability to be able to metabolize your diet, your ability to be able to digest your food, all of these things, it operates inconsistently, and you have to find the right kind of diet that works for you. I have a dear friend of mine who is a restaurateur, and for years we have been talking about a human design restaurant. And in a human design restaurant, people eat according to their type. And in that restaurant, manifestors choose what they like. Generators have to wait to be asked so they can respond. Projectors always get invited to something for free, so they feel like they should be there and enjoy their meal. And reflectors are given the meal of the day. No choice. The meal of the day. Now, this is something very important for you to understand about your diet. If you don't like, generally speaking, the local diet, you're in the wrong place. If you discover that the only food that you like to eat is Thai, then you better pack your bags. And I'm not joking. It's one of the most important things for you to recognize about your gift of being sensitive to the field around you. If you're not eating what the majority of the people are eating in your neighborhood, in your area, then you're not attuned to them. You're not. You can't be. And so one of the things to recognize about the way in which you eat, it's not that you can't eat the occasional this meal or that kind of food or whatever, because you'll find in our modern environments, that's what other people in your neighborhood are also doing. But it's very important to see that local food, local recipes, local produce, that's very, very important for your diet. Very important. And the more exotic your diet becomes, the less in touch you are with your life here. So this is something really to keep in mind. Remember about the nature of human design. Human design is logical knowledge. It's not here to be believed in. These are experiments for you to work with. You're the first generation of reflectors. You're here to really experiment with it and to see its inherent truth. But please pay attention to diet and sleep, because these are fundamental things in your life. And you'll discover that when you're eating local produce, when you're eating mostly the local diet, that your digestive system works better, that your metabolism works better, and that you feel healthier in your diet. And it's something important for you. Think about this 28-day process and why decision-making for you is something that has to wait the end of these cycles. Now, by the way, the timing of that. Remember that your primary strategy, the strategy that says that when something important comes into your life, whether it's about place, which is primary, or work, or direction in life, or education, or friends, or colleagues, those things that are really going to be significant for you in your life, that those are the kind of decisions in which you have to be given the sufficient timing to be able to look at it. Now, many reflectors are concerned that by saying to somebody that's very interesting and I'd like to consider it, but I need a month, A lot of them feel like they're going to lose opportunities because of that. I mean, they just do. You know, some people, they figure, well, people don't want to wait a month. You know, if somebody wants me now and I tell them they're going to have to wait a month, then they're not going to want me a month later. Oh, don't believe that. It's one of the most powerful things that you can discover about yourself because it is your truth. When you're telling somebody that you need a month, you're not making it up. It's not arbitrary. It's actually a reality for you. You do need that month. And they will take that in. They will take that in and they will wait. This is one of the things for you to find out in that process. They may not like it. You know, everybody would like you to be, you know, right now, but that's not the point. You have to remember that your primary strategy are for the most important things in your life. Now think about what happens in that situation. Somebody comes to you with an opportunity to, you know, to have a new job in a new place. The kind of thing that really requires you to be able to go through your process and to be clear. Look at what actually happens. Let's just take the moon and just imagine different connections here. So we've already seen that one connection here is about influence. So what's going to happen in that moment? In that moment, everything that's being processed is about, you know, is this going to be influential? Is this going to work? Am I going to be able to fulfill that as a direction? That's the way the process. And because it's the throat center, that's when this person is going to be naturally talkative. So all of a sudden, for as long as that transit's going to be there, you know, their capacity is to talk about what influence is possible, what can be achieved if they say yes to that possibility for them. But then again, it could be over here. And this is the 36th gate, and the 36th gate is part of the channel of change and transitoriness, and the 36th gate is the gate of crisis. And when the moon goes into the 35th gate, suddenly there's going to be a crisis. You know, you're going to have your 12-hour crisis. And that 12-hour crisis is, oh my God, I don't know what to do, and it's not going to work, and if I better tell them now, and I can't wait the rest of the time, and I don't know what's going to happen. You know. And you know, now most people don't realize, of course, that that's going on, so that they assume that, you know, that crisis somehow is a place for them to make a decision. But if you're a reflector and that's your design, and you actually watch the program, you'll discover that 14 times a year you have a crisis in the way in which you process. It's just there. It's built in. But it's not in and of itself the answer. You can come over here and you can go to the 32nd gate, and the 32nd gate duration, this is in the splenic center, the feel-good center, and this is the gate where the deepest fear is the fear of failure. And every time the moon comes to the 54th gate, the marrying maiden, this is a gate of ambition. So, you know, when the moon comes to the 54th gate, this person is saying, yes, I can, you know, I don't have to be a failure. I've got the energy. I'm now under pressure to be ambitious, to be a success. You can't make the decision in those 12 hours. You know, this is part of the whole picture that's building. And it's a picture that builds over that whole frequency. You're here to be the deepest of people. You're here to be wise. And you see, you're not like anybody else who has to process things immediately or process things in an emotional wave. You're here to process things over time because you get to focus on different aspects in different ways, and it's a consistent cycle. Over and over and over again in your life, you're going to go through this cycle. I have several old reflector friends of mine in America that I met when I was teaching in America. And one of them went through a process of charting their program, watching it, and did that for about 6 months. And afterwards he said to me, he said, you know, he said, I can feel it click over now and I don't have to look. He can just feel the shifts. You know, he's so used to the sense of what that's like that he can now feel the shifts as it goes along. He can see from what place over here there he was processing, it's now being processed over here. And he said, it's the most incredible thing. You can just feel it moving. See, you have a gift. You have a deep, deep gift of being able to absorb everything. I mean, everything. So the moment you see that that's not haphazard, And it's not uniform. You're each very unique in the way in which you take in the program from the outside and the way in which you process it. So if you wait your cycle, and you wait until all of these different aspects have gone through their mechanism, because that's your mechanism, then you can get to a place where you can say yes or no. And of course, that's the greatest liberation of all for a reflector, is to be able to be in a position where they can use their primary strategy, because from the moment you say yes is the moment that you lose your ability to remain a reflector. This is what happens to you all the time. The moment that you say yes and you engage in that relationship with the other, you immediately take on their programming. And of course, the most important thing for you to see is that dependency on a single person is always a risk for you. You need to have many people in your lives. It's very, very important. But also to realize what your secondary strategy is. And your secondary strategy is that once you've entered into something correctly, from that point onward, you must be shown respect and you must be asked. Asked. Because you've entered into the correct relationship, okay, it's no longer a question of having to wait out the cycle of the moon. It isn't. Remember, that's primary strategy. What's essential from that point onwards is you're asked so you can be in charge of saying what you do or what you don't do, because you're here to be in control. So you have these two forms of your strategy. But to discover yourselves, you need to go through this program. And you need to go through it enough until you're familiar with it, not simply intellectually. Remember, you are sensitive. It's not about just recognizing it intellectually. Oh yes, this is my mental time, this is my emotional time, blah, blah, blah. But it's to feel it. It's to feel it. When I had my mystical experience, I had no connection to the esoteric, the New Age. I was a nihilist and an atheist. The idea that the moon was going to do anything to me was hilarious, other than light up the night sky. I was not somebody who was into all this stuff. And the most extraordinary thing for me, I'm somebody with an open emotional system, the most extraordinary thing for me was when I was given the knowledge, I began my own experiment with it. Obviously, I wanted to see what it was. Was I crazy or was this something legitimate? And in going through that process, the moon was my greatest ally. Because in my open emotional system, I have 4 ways in which it can be connected. And oh boy, what an experience. I was sitting on a rock and all of a sudden I was crying and I didn't know why, and it was the moon. And the cry that I felt was just like a cry I knew from somewhere deep inside of me. Years ago, my father was killed in a car accident. And I was never there at the time that it happened, but later, several years later, I was in Canada, and my mother and my sister asked me if I'd like to go out and see the grave of my father. And I said, yes, polite thing to do. And they take me out to the graveyard, and I go over, and they go for a walk, and there's my father's tombstone. And yeah, I had already gone through my grief, and it's a long time since he died, and it was very nice, and blah, blah, blah. And I was just sitting there and lost in thought. And all of a sudden I feel a pain come into my body, like a knife, a spiral, hot. And in that moment of that recognition of the pain, tears start coming out of my eyes. And I turn around and there's my mother and there's my eldest sister, both of whom made me emotional. And I'm crying their tears. There's the young one and the father and blah, 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 and all this stuff, and they're all touched and they're emotional, and I've got this going through me, and it's exactly the same thing I experienced with the moon doing that to me. You have to feel them inside of you, because you can. And then you can really understand how things work and how it works with beings around you. Only in a situation like this would I actually get to this point, and that is dealing with the nature of relationships. It's often very difficult to deal with relationships with reflectors because of the depth of generalized conditioning. We're conditioned that our primary relationship is always with one person. And that's the way that all the types are conditioned. And the whole thing about the nature of a reflector is that the most important force for a reflector is never simply one person. It isn't. It is the community, it is the tribe, or in most cases, it is the family. And there is a need for a larger aura to be involved. That presents difficulties, and it presents difficulties in partnership courses that I have done. You know, one of the things that I tell people at the end of these partnership courses, and I tell them not to get upset and what to do, is that basically we are designed to be with our own kind. We are. Now, it's easy for me to tell generators to be with generators because they are the majority and they're easy to find. You have to be very lucky to be a reflector and find a reflector. I know. There are very few reflector couples in the world, and it is the only relationship at a personal level that can actually work for a reflector. And this is a dilemma for them. After all, they're a small percentage of the population. You know, if it's one reflector in 100 people in a room, you can imagine that you need a pretty big room just to begin to see if you have any kind of selection. You know, you either have a karma with it, you obviously have a karma with it, but the whole business about being a reflector and being in a one-and-one relationship, it just doesn't work unless they're your own kind. Now, it can be possible with a projector, because a projector is, in fact, a non-energy type. However, even with a projector, it still is ultimately going to end up with the reflector constantly either being dominated or compromised. Now, these are terms that are there in design. A dominance is when somebody has a whole channel and you don't have it, and a compromise is when you have part of a channel and somebody has the whole channel. And of course, in that compromise can lead to a lot of tension and frustration. So it's exceedingly difficult for reflectors to actually find relationships, even being correct. You know, an energy type comes up to a reflector and says, you know, I really want you and I really, you know, blah, 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 and let's live together and da-da-da. And the reflector says, okay, give me a month, you know, and the energy type says, all right, and, you know, and the reflector goes through their process and they get to the end of the month and they say, yes, it's okay. They're still going to get to a point in that relationship where this is simply a lesser of evils. That's all. A lesser of evils, because they will get to a place where they are simply uncomfortable. See, they're not designed for just one person. They're not. They're not designed to be mostly sensitive to just one person. That's what everybody else is. That's not what they are. They're here to be sensitive to an environment. Most of the reflectors I know would continually have children just to make sure they have an environment. You know, because it's the environment that matters for them. The community, whatever it is, the colleagues that they have. It's like you can't take a reflector and put them in an office by themselves. You know, they've got to be in an open space with other people, otherwise it's not going to work. And you can't just put them in a room with one other person and say, here's your partner, you work with this person. It's not for them. It's not going to work. So when it comes to relationships, this is often a very difficult subject for reflectors because they know. It's very hard for a reflector with somebody who is a non-reflector to stay in a relationship. It's very difficult. The reflectors that I know go in and out of relationships often. I mean, there's just no consistency. Because ultimately what happens to you as a reflector is that the moment that somebody is bringing definition to you is the moment that they're dominating you. And at a one-to-one level, that's very difficult to deal with all the time. If you happen to be two reflectors and you come together, it doesn't matter what the result is. You know, if you come together and you're generators, well, you share it and you share it equally. And it's not conditioning from the outside. It's something that's actually a byproduct of the two of you together. But this whole business of relationship is really a difficult one for reflectors because they're not here for one-to-one relationships unless it's with somebody of their own kind. You know, I never mention that in public evenings. I don't want to upset the one reflector that might be in the room and not really understand what that all means because they don't have enough depth of information. Your gift is really to sense a larger organism at work. And your gift is to be able to, be sensitive to and to be able to integrate what's going on in the community around you. And that means that you can't be given a focus that's simply on one person. It's just not there. And the beauty of being with your own type is you're both like that. You're both like that. So you end up being able to share that, and that's a foundation for a solid relationship. I mentioned earlier the emotional system, the open emotional system. It's important for you to know that there is a not-self strategy that comes with that open emotional system. And basically the way it works is that it's called don't rock the boat. Each of you have an open solar plex smile. She did too. Everybody that has an open solar plex has that smile, and that smile says, I'm a nice person. I don't want to mess with you. Don't mess with me. Everything will be fine as long as you don't irritate me or annoy me. And as long as you don't irritate me, annoy me, crank me up, or anything else, I'll continue to smile with you, but I don't want any confrontations and I don't want any trouble. And the moment I smell confrontation or trouble, I'm going to run away. That's the smile. And that's the smile that you've had all your life ever since you were kids. It's the smile that acts as a kind of armor for you. It's a smile that says, don't pollute me with your negative emotions because I can't handle it. But what's essential for you to understand about that is that it starts a strategy very early in life of not telling the truth. And that not telling the truth is not so much lying as leaving things out. That is not telling the truth to those around you and not telling the truth ultimately to yourself. The way it works is very simple. As an unemotional child, you go to school, particularly in the case of being a reflector where you're so open. And something happens that is not pleasant for you, whatever it is. It upsets you, you have a really difficult time with whatever it may be. Now, when you come home at the end of the day, it's not like you're going to run in the house and you're going to tell necessarily your parents what happened. Chances are that if you do that, you're going to have to relive that emotional experience. You're going to have to take all that energy back into your body again, and that's the last thing you want to do. The last thing you want to do is be in the room while your mother and father are fighting. The last thing you want to do is be around when any of that emotional energy is on display. So what you do is you come home from school and they say, how was your day? And you say, fine. Fine. And you start a lifelong process of hiding things, not letting people know. So most reflectors end up in relationships in which they feel trapped. And they build up a deep resentment to the people that they're with because they're constantly being conditioned by them. It's not mutual. It's not their own kind. They're constantly being conditioned, and that part of them, that open solar plex is saying, yeah, but if I tell them, it's going to be ugly and painful, and and I'm going to have to take all that stuff into my body, and I'm going to have to process all those horrible emotions, and I don't want to feel like that. I know what that's like. I know what it's like to have an open emotional system. You crank up the emotional system, it can nauseate you, it ties your stomach up into knots, your body starts shaking. The emotions are powerful. No wonder these children develop a strategy to avoid it. But it's not like suddenly you become an adult and you say, I don't need that anymore. It stays there. And it means that when it comes to one-on-one relationships, this old strategy that's in you, this starts to be a real problem. The problem is that the moment a reflector is with anyone who's not a reflector, that's the moment when they're trying to protect themselves. So it's much better to have casual relationships, colleagues, friends, all of that around, where you can live that out. In a way, to protect yourself. But to recognize, you have to understand, you've been avoiding those things, really avoiding them all your life. You just don't want to hear about them. You don't really want to deal with them, and it's always there. As long as you're not functioning correctly, as long as you're not making decisions that are correct, as long as you're allowing people to tell you what to do, that strategy in you makes you sick. It does. It locks you in. It doesn't give you a chance to be clear, and it doesn't give you a chance to be able to, operate the way you should. So important for you to see how correct you have to be. And also to recognize that that openness has left you vulnerable. And you have to transcend that vulnerability. You have to. The only way you can do that is by being certain in the way in which you operate. But sleep and food, those things we've talked about today, they're really important for you to begin stabilizing your whole biosystem. Because the moment you start feeling better physically, remember you're born with open spleens. You don't naturally feel good. You'll find that if you eat properly and you sleep properly, that feel good, it doesn't disappear, that not feeling good, but you realize something, that you're physically okay, that you're physically strong, and that's a starting place for you. But you know, the whole decision-making process, the demand that you are never told, these are things that are essential for you. Otherwise, you so easily get trapped in all this old strategy. It's a real challenge for reflectors to wake up. It really is. It's a real challenge. And most of that is because as adults, you've already been through deep conditioning. To go through the deconditioning process is not something you can do in a vacuum. You're surrounded by the connections that you've built up over the years, the family, the friends, the lovers, the whatever the case may be. And of course, you're deep within that matrix. Human design is truly for children. It really is for children. And you know, the reality is that any child that comes into the world is a reflector and is treated as such in the way that it's raised by its parents will never have to go through a deconditioning process and will naturally find its right place, its rightful place, not only in the community, but the rightful work for it and so forth and so on. But that's not the case. The case is that we're dealing with adults, and we're dealing with adults who ultimately, hopefully, will be able to teach younger people. And eventually be able to teach parents and so forth and so on. You're the beginning of an experiment. The reality is for you that because you have lives, you have to see that this is this is not something to be obsessed with. This is something to simply investigate. And the key to the investigation is discovering the way in which you work. This mapping of the wheel, this following of the lunar program, beginning to understand your mechanism, beginning to understand how that mechanism works, this is absolutely essential for you. If you combine that with basic things, the sleeping, the eating, whatever, if you combine it with the insistence that you're respected and that you're asked, regardless of the density of the world around you and the way it's conditioning you, you will be able to move through that. But the key in that is that you really have to understand how it works. And not only understand it intellectually, but be able to internalize it and feel it. And that's really that's the conditioning factor. You cannot afford, because you're designed to be wise, you cannot afford to be ignorant. And the level of knowledge that you have has to be greater than anybody else's when it comes to understanding how these things work. It's simply the way that it must work for you. In some ways, you're very advantaged. That is, Wien is a place where I have worked for 10 years. There are an enormous number of very talented teachers, analysts here locally. There are people that can help you understand the knowledge and give you the background and foundation you need for your own investigation. It is your investigation, and you have to begin to see what that uniqueness is and what the pattern of that uniqueness is. But ultimately, I want you to grasp what I try to share with all my students is what I call personal mythology. To really see and really to get to live out your purpose. To be able to fulfill what you're here for. You are here to assess the well-being of the community around you. You are here to be of enormous value to the community around you because you can do that. And ultimately, if you're living correctly as yourself, the opportunities will come in this life for you to take on that kind of role, however it may, manifest itself. Those opportunities will be there for you in this life where you can fulfill your role as a reflector. And that's what it's all about. And when you get to that moment, that's the moment that you know that you've really accomplished something special. Because finally you're in the right place at the right time, and in that you can really be fulfilled.